first of all, this is one of the big ticket bills of the session, lots of chatter about it. Just talk to me about why each of you decided to run this legislation.
Sure. So I had a bill last year that dealt with ideological commitment statements. And in the interim, I started hearing from a lot of professors and faculty and staff at our universities who were very concerned about the campus climate and issues that they're seeing. And they really said, keep going on what you're doing. Please investigate and keep moving on it. And so in our discussions that I had with them, they kind of pointed to some of those diversity ideological commitment statements as kind of a litmus test for hiring. And as we've seen, the University of Utah has already stopped those. So part of this bill just codifies what the University of Utah has done for the whole state. And as we looked at some other things, we just felt it was really an important thing to kind of have offices at our universities that are inclusive of everyone, that are including all of our students, and any student at risk can find success and find help there. So that's kind of the biggest reasons.
From the Senate side, we had a bill also that didn't deal directly with diversity statements, but talked about academic freedom on campus. That was run by Senator John Johnson. Then we had other bills out there, and so just during the interim, we talked with Representative Hall and said, hey, let's look at this issue. Let's meet often with all the stakeholders, the people that are going to be affected by this legislation, and then combine those two bills because it kind of falls under the window of DEI. We thought that was wise and prudent, and then so we have the components of this bill. As the first major components, it eliminates diversity statements across the board for higher ed, public ed, and government entities. And then focus on academic freedom, which establishes the ability for everyone to say whatever it is they need to say on campus. It's a neutral site. It's a marketplace of ideas, and we want to make sure that's guaranteed. And then we looked at the offices and getting services to students, and so obviously the name of this bill is Equal Opportunity Initiative. So in the bill, it codifies student success centers or offices, however they want to determine on the university campuses, to make sure that students of all at-risk categories are provided services so that they can hopefully graduate if they decide to do the work, but get the service they need to make sure that they have good inputs.
Okay, so before I drill down into some of the specifics, I mean, just on its face, you get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion offices, and you're labeled as this is racist, right? So talk to me about what your response would be to that, because regardless of what the bill actually does, it's the messaging of the bill that I think is rubbing some people the wrong way. What's your response to that?
Well, if I may.
Please, yes.
Yeah, sure. I've never heard that label. No one's labeled me as racist or this legislation. It's the design, and working with Representative Hall has always been about focusing on the students, all students. And it's even though we're in a political environment, this bill is intentionally meant to depoliticize this situation, which people on either side of the aisle and either extreme of the aisle, we're going to try to take this and run with it and say it's not enough or it's too much. And so we're just looking at it with objective eyes. I believe this bill is the bill that captures the intent of whatever DEI was meant to do 20, 30 years ago. It reestablished the norms, making sure that all students have access to education and help regardless of their circumstance. So that's my response.
Some of the pushback too is that you want to prop up all students, right? You don't want any student to have any more resources than any other student. And the argument there is there are groups who have been marginalized. There are groups who need extra help. And I know you're not saying let's not get them help, but I think, again, the pushback is kind of like, well, do white kids need as much help as brown and black kids, or is there an argument that brown and black kids
Let me catch you right there. It's not that we're going to provide services to all students. It's the students that are at risk. And so students receiving services today at any university campus, they're going to notice no change. In fact, they'll have the same opportunity to get those inputs, whatever they might be, regardless of their situation. The truth of the matter is this bill is also going to cast a broad umbrella over anyone else that doesn't fall within one of these well-defined groups. In fact, some students straddle groups or may not even reach out because they're not part of a certain group. And so we're just removing those barriers so everyone can have access to those.
You're saying it perfectly.
Okay, so I just want to make sure.
You're saying it perfectly.
So, okay, some of the language says schools can't assert directly or indirectly that anyone's race, color, sex, religion receive differential treatment beyond programs, policies, training. This training piece kind of caught my attention a little bit. So you're saying universities can't even train students? Train their faculty on how to have conversations around race, around religion?
I don't think they're saying they can't have conversations. That's the whole thing. We're trying to open up conversation. We're just saying they can't. There's prohibited discriminatory practices, and we're saying as long as they don't fall under these prohibited discriminatory practices, then let's talk about them. And we should be talking about anything regardless, right? We're trying to open up free speech on campuses so they can talk about these hard situation conversations. The prohibited trainings is more that the school cannot require or mandate certain trainings, especially on these prohibited discriminatory practices.
Okay, and what benefit does that have to prohibit trainings?
Well, these trainings as currently constituted are very narrow, and they're looking at trainings about how to follow certain theories, perhaps, or this is what this means or what this means. Those trainings are not allowed in this bill. All other trainings as constituted on college campuses will continue to go forward. We just want to make sure that we are, like Representative Hall said, that under certain discriminating practices, they're just not allowed in any way, shape, or form. They just discriminate, and by choosing a winner, you choose losers. And so everyone.
So give me an example of a training that couldn't happen versus one that could.
That's a good question. I've been actually given some trainings by professors that they've asked me not to share, so I don't know how to answer that question, like without giving up certain things.
And I think, and I think a deep dive. You talk to any of the university presidents that have these offices on campus. You could just ask them, and they'd have certain things that they may or may not be aware of, where they could get that answer to that.
And we're giving them license to take a look at all of their trainings, and this bill is not super prescriptive of saying you can't do this training, you can't do this training. We're saying these are the things that we're highlighting that are discriminatory practices. So they'll have to take a look at their trainings and then see from there and go from there. We're giving them that freedom and ability to do that.
One of the lines too says, further, universities can assert someone should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, etc., solely based on these characteristics, race, religion, sex, etc. How do we control what others feel? Like that language kind of is, what's that trying to?
Oh, that's a great question. That's just the intent of the legislation in that particular line. That is what the desire of the legislature is for these campuses. We can't control anyone. We're just setting these boundaries, these guideposts, if you will. We definitely can't control how people feel, but that is the intent of legislation. That's kind of the direction we're going with this.
Talk to me about the juxtaposition, and then I'll let Eric ask his questions. You prohibit universities from taking public stances on these issues in particular, but you want to promote free speech. How does that square?
Again, as I referred to earlier, the campuses should be a marketplace of ideas, neutral campus. We don't need, it's just not appropriate for departments to sponsor certain types of discriminatory practices. You can have your own opinions, of course. If you're a professor in a classroom, you get to teach what you want. If you're teaching one of these controversial theories, whatever, that's been out in the press lately, that's super fine. This legislation doesn't touch that because students opt into those classes. And then for universities to take a stand one way or the other, supporting one group or another group, which we have seen is completely, it's just not allowed in this bill, but it's never really been allowed, so it's kind of reasserting that position. However, students on campus, if they want to talk about one issue or the other, if they want to form their own groups or whatever that might be, that's fine. They're able to act and have those free speech. But my message to the campus students is that sometimes the messages we hear, we may not like. They may be contrary to our entire whatever we grew up with, and they may be repulsive. Well, guess what? That's part of being on an academic campus, or in our country, is tolerating the opinions of others, which we've not always seen. When reestablished that all opinions, all points of view will be respected and must be respected and must be tolerated.
And who determines what is considered indirectly differential treatment? So like this bill says, you can't directly or indirectly promote differential treatment based on these things. Who decides what's indirect treatment.
Again, this is, and go back to what Representative Hall, this is not overly prescriptive. And so every campus in our state is quite different. You know, SUU will have a different component.
But you're making it illegal,
Right, and so,
so how do we, who enforces it?
well, that's a great question. So they will do an assessment in this next year, up until 2025, and bring back either practices or things that have been going on campuses. There may be something, there may not be anything at all. And then we'll relook at it again in 2025 and reassess, kind of say where we're at and answer that question. Say, okay, does that what the intent of the legislation was?
Do you have support from all of Utah's public universities?
We have done a lot of what we've talked about has been work with USHE, with the higher ed board. And so we think that we'll have support for that.
But you don't right now.
Oh, no, I would say this has not been done in the shadows. They've had a
it's
seat
been-
at the table.
yeah.
Many of the lines of language that are in here have come from various people in different institutions saying, hey, this would be helpful for us. This doesn't make sense to us. I think we've
Seeing
sat
more
down
and
and,
more of that,
yeah, and I've
covered.
been working with those groups and saying, okay, this doesn't work because of A, B, and C on our campus. Like, oh, what do you think about it? This has been worked on, not in the shadows. It's been like so much bright light shown on it, and trying to get all of the nuances out of the way that would create heartache and headache on their campuses. So I would say that they are very aware. They've been in touch with, through USHE and through other people, that it's not something that is catching them by surprise. And so they're just, I'm not saying they're all going to say, this is the bill we wanted. I'm sure they have other things to worry about on campus. But the nature of having a legislature, and we're the super board, if you will, of all of the institutions, so we get to throw our eyes on this and try to do what's right through statewide for all of the institutions. And so,
Have you worked with the minority caucus on this at all?
yes, I have. Yeah, I know in our caucus that they've had a chance prior to the release to look at the language, to opine, to give input, and I did receive some input. And so, yeah, I'm not saying they're going to be overly supportive or anything like that.
What
but
was their input? X? Is that their input?
Actually, with my minority caucus leader, it was a very, very positive conversation. So it's surprising that I've heard some of the comments I've heard. I have no idea where those came from. So very supportive of the process. Not saying supportive of the legislation.
Right.
And the same, we had a
Representative
meeting with,
Merrill's on board?
well,
Or-
I wouldn't say she's on board, but we did have a discussion before the bill came out and talked about some of the things, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's been good faith all along the way. And I sat with Representative Hall. It's like, we need to make sure that minority caucus is informed.
Yeah.
As we're getting the language perfected, as you know, it's a process and coming out of drafting and relooking at it. So once we had it where we thought was pretty good, then we said,
Right.
please let us know your input. That's something we could just say no and throw the bill out and they get it at the same time. But we don't operate that way in Utah.
So how
Very
do we
open.
help minority communities on college campuses? How do we help those students of color who research has shown have been disadvantaged without programs like this? I mean, I understand you're creating these success centers that helps everyone, but there are specific programs that target specifically some of these groups. How do we help them?
My understanding is they'll still be available. We're just opening them up to everyone, anyone that needs help, anyone that needs to find aid and all the things that the Student Success Centers will offer to any student that is in need.
And I've worked in public education and in universities for over almost 3 decades now, and it really comes down to, frankly, in the university setting, marketing, letting you know what services are available. I've worked with so many different types of at-risk students in my entire career. It really becomes an issue of helping whatever community it might be, whatever at-risk situation we might find a student in or family, help them understand what service is available. It really comes down to that. So again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. A student receiving services that's at risk could be from a minority community, can be from a gender situation, could be any scenario, are not going to have the banners ripped down from over an office say, go away, you can't come in. It's like, no, their services will continue. And like Representative Hall said, it's going to be make sure that everyone has access to that and understand what services are available. And I would predict that you're going to find even more dynamic and helpful services as more people have an eye on this and be able to receive those services.
So at-risk students, that's who you're trying to help here,
Correct.
regardless
I
of-
think at-risk is one of
At-risk
those
or-
federal definitions that should capture most of the students in these categories, because at-risk could mean, it's so broad and it's a very helpful term. And that, again, is what an at-risk student at SUU may not quite be that at-risk student in Utah State, depending on where they're coming from. And it's just, I don't want to tell too many stories, but I've worked with Kickapoo Indians who are not at risk in Texas, but very at risk when they come to do migrant work here in Utah. So the situations change from time to time, but yeah, generally they should be the same categories.
Eric, sorry, I
No, you're
monopolized
fine.
all
No,
the time.
you covered it.
Keep going, do you have any questions?
I don't, they were all just pretty much the same, so you did great.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you make of the public perception of this bill?
And Senator Glover, do you need to go?
No, I'm good.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay.
We need to go, so this will be the last question.
Resident Hall can answer, obviously, and I'll answer.
Make of the public perception, I think it's going to be in how we all message it, everyone on the Hill and everyone involved. Like Senator Grover was saying, if we get the message out that there's student centers for everyone, that is there to help everyone, that's half of the messaging that we want. We're not trying to say no to anyone or put anyone in a box or in a different group. And so this is opening it up to anyone in need. It could
Right, but
be
it does prescribe some things you can't do.
if they are discriminatory, yes.
So, and I'll go ahead and answer that. How is the public going to perceive? What was your question again? Say that again.
Yeah, what do you make of the public perception of this bill?
So far for me, for people who have been speaking to me, and I work in various communities, it's been positive. And that doesn't mean just people that look like me or that live in the area that I live in, which is Utah County, which is very homogeneous. They're all divergent populations as well. And so they have been supportive, curious, wondering, a little bit of worry. And once they get the information that what this bill does, it's very, very helpful and they're positive. The dynamic is no one likely outside of this Capitol and a few others are going to read the 68, 78 pages of this bill.
That's why we're here.
And so, right, and so it's how we articulate what we're doing and actually what we're not doing. And we're not doing a lot of things that I see are perceived out there. And so the more that I do my own little thing for my little web page and stuff like that and get the information out, the more that we do conversations like this, I understand that this is something we've been working on to make sure it's a very positive change to our universities, mostly universities, but it affects other agencies as well, then I think then the public, if they have the information in front of them, then they can deliberate. And I think they'll be like, oh, okay, this makes sense. We may not like this part or this part, but I can see how this would be good for Utah.
When will we see this come to the floor?
It just got read into
It's got to go to committee first.
into education
Okay.
today when I was in there. So tomorrow is the education
Tomorrow,
meeting.
education.
And I want to add too, I have had a lot of minorities reach out to me and say that they're supportive of this bill and they're planning on coming in support. So I think you'll see a lot of that.
Okay. Anything else you want to add that I didn't ask you? You think is important?
You want us to know
She forgot that one question.
I know. It's like, no, ABC4 got it. So we'll just they'll scoop it.
No, I'm giving you an opportunity to say whatever you want to say. This isn't like I don't have questions to ask.
No,
I
we're
just
kidding.
made fun.
We're
No,
kidding.
those are-
It's all good.
I
That was
don't
good.
know. There's really, it's not like there's anything else hiding in that bill. Those are
Yeah.
the big components.
It's
of it.
really,
But, I mean, the language is pretty specific.
Yes, very much so.
You know, just kind of some of this, like, inherent, I think the language is, asserts directly or indirectly. That language to me feels weird. Like, how do we prove that someone indirectly did this? What does that mean? You know, that was kind of my interpretation as I read it. I was just like, how do we, like, it's clear if you're like, oh, this person said this to me, that would be a direct assertion, but to indirectly assert something, that seems vague.
happens a lot.
Yeah, they can.
I mean, because essentially you're making it illegal, so it feels like we need to have it.
Well, you could have a situation where I don't like purple sweaters you have on. I say I don't like a purple sweater, and I don't like purple sweater wearing people. But indirectly might be Representative Hall saying, I'm like, you know, it's that type of behavior that's not helpful for our college campuses. We don't need
That's
that.
true.